tried to succeed. All daring and courage, all iron endurance of misfortune, make for a finer, nobler type of manhood. Only those are fit to live who do not fear to die, and none are fit to die who have shrunk from the joy of life or the duty of life. Theodore Roosevelt. Was pretty good. I think I did a decent job at that one. They moved everything. Why did they move everything? Where's all the things?
From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where our head scullery wench has just retired, and we wish her the very best of luck in her future endeavors. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. So glad to have you with us tonight. Here's your Golden Age of Western Civilization news roundup for the week ending 11 July 2025. Dayline, Mexico City, Monday, 7 July. Protests erupted in Mexico's capital city earlier this week, with Mexican residents expressing their displeasure about all the foreign migrants in their midst who refuse to learn their national language or to acquaint themselves with Mexican history and culture. And yes, if you hadn't noticed already, this story is a bit of an irony sandwich. And you know what the biggest irony was for me? That came when I was reading the article about this story, and it was accompanied by a photograph of a protester holding up a sign that read, "Pay taxes, learn Spanish, respect my culture." And the sign was written in English. And frankly, that's so many layers of irony, I don't even know that the English language furnishes any adjective that does it justice. And I know what you're probably thinking right now. You're thinking, wait a minute, what group of non-Spanish speaking, refusing to assimilate foreign migrants could be causing so much upset and disquiet among the denizens of Mexico City? And I think you might already have a hunch what the answer is, because yeah, it's white liberal Americans, so many of whom have taken up residence in the Mexican capital in recent years, and they've made so little effort to acculturate themselves to their new Mexican homeland that it's causing Mexicans to take to the streets in protest over the gringo menace. We used to think this was a purely internal phenomenon here in the United States, where idiot liberals from California and New York and so on, upset that their own favored policies and politicians have reduced their home states to an unlivable dystopian hellscape of misery and suffering and human despair, that they move to other states and immediately start voting for the very self-same policies that made them flee their previous homes. But it's encouraging to know, I think, that these same idiots are now unsatisfied with culturally polluting other states within America, and they've broadened their horizons and begun going to foreign countries and trying to wreck them as well. According to a report from the New York Times, the protests, which turned violent last Friday night, quote, reflected the growing frustrations of many of the capital's residents who have watched rents skyrocket and old neighborhoods turn into swanky developments as the city has become a major tourist destination and a base for many so-called digital nomads, end quote. The report continues, since the coronavirus pandemic, stylish neighborhoods like Roma and Condesa in Mexico City have seen an influx of foreigners coaxed by lower living costs and the opportunity to work remotely. The surge has helped businesses in areas popular with foreigners and landlords or those renting rooms for long-term stays on platforms like Airbnb. But it has also threatened to make large swaths of the city where the average monthly salary is about $370, unaffordable to many locals, end quote. So to put it a different way, the same Americans who turned America into Mexico are now hard at work turning Mexico into America. We will keep you apprised of any further developments. Dateline Washington, Tuesday, 8 July. Vice President J.D. Vance castigated the Democrat nominee for mayor of New York City this week, wondering out loud just who the hell Zoran Mamdani thinks he is, which is probably not an unfair question. Because did you ever notice how the biggest fans of communism have never actually lived in a communist society or anything remotely resembling one? Did you ever notice that when an American claims to be a big fan of communism, it is always a pampered rich kid with at least one parent who is an Ivy League college professor, a kid who has reaped all the benefits of the American system and now wants to throw that system into the dumpster and replace it with some idiotic form of neo-Stalinism? And this Mamdani jackass is even less subtle about it than most of them are. This guy, he directly quotes Karl Marx himself when you ask him to describe his political outlook. Does he realize he's directly quoting Karl Marx? Well, I can't say. But when you say that your top priorities are to seize the means of production and confiscate private residences to turn them into communes, you haven't left yourself a whole lot of wiggle room to claim that you're not a Marxist, because you sound like some gullible, credulous teenager who just read Das Kapital for the first time. You know what I'm talking about. We all had that friend in high school, didn't we? The one who had a 1-month-long love affair with Marxism and then spent the rest of their senior year trying to live it down after somebody took the time to explain to him that these ideas have been tried multiple times in many different parts of the world, and they always result 100% of the time in people having to eat their own children to stay alive. Communism doesn't need to be discredited. It has done a wonderful job of discrediting itself. But don't try telling that to the young man who is probably going to be the next mayor of the largest city in the country, because he says, without a hint of irony, that he wants the government to control the food supply. This guy makes Leon Trotsky look like fucking Barry Goldwater. He is a hard leftist, even by communist standards. If and when he becomes the mayor, can he actually do any of the things he says he wants to do? Of course he can't. This is, after all, the United States of America. You can't just start a communist enclave because you feel like it. I mean, just ask those Chaz Chop kids from Seattle. They can tell you all about that. So is there a moral to this story? Yes. And the moral is, Andrew Cuomo was such a terrible governor, people would rather eat their own children than live under his leadership. So take that for what you will. Dateline Washington, Wednesday, 9 July. The Secret Service suspended 6 agents this week for their conduct during and after the assassination attempt on former and future President Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania last July. An anonymous source, said to be close to the agency, told ABC News that the suspended personnel range from the supervisory level to the line agent level, and since it is an anonymously sourced report from ABC News, it goes without saying that we should take this all with a boulder-sized grain of salt. But it certainly is true, as any observer can tell you, with or without any internal review or any news report, that the Secret Service did not crown itself in glory on that day, and the fact that Donald Trump escaped with his life had more to do with the gunman's poor marksmanship than it did with the efforts of the men and women who were charged with safeguarding him. As we know, Kimberly Cheadle, the incompetent buffoon who was somehow the head of the Secret Service on the fateful day in question, she was forced to resign her position after she went up to Capitol Hill and was unwilling to concede that the personnel in her charge had made any mistakes, and she also couldn't bring herself to say that the Secret Service's DEI hiring initiatives might have compromised the safety of any of its protectees, even when the real-world result was, as we all witnessed, a 5'0", 97-pound female agent attempting to shield the 6'4" President Trump with her dainty little body. And then it took her, about 38 seconds to get out her sidearm and disengage the safety? Because that was a very outstanding look for our Secret Service, wasn't it? It was just about as excruciating as watching Tim Walz trying to reload his shotgun. Tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary of the Butler attack, and do we know any information today that we didn't know then? Nah, not really. We don't even know who gave the order to cremate the shooter's corpse before any post-mortem could be performed. Why don't we know that? Well, I can't say. But it's a pretty big goddamn thing to still not know, and there are a lot of other big goddamn things we still don't know about the events of that day. And if I'm Jim Comer and I'm the head of the House Oversight Committee, I would be more interested in that question than in any question about Joe Biden's auto pen, but I guess that's just me. Dateline Indianapolis, Thursday, 10 July. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first person ever confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court, despite being a complete fucking idiot, told the convention of the Indianapolis Bar Association this week that she is very deeply concerned about something she calls the state of our democracy. Justice Brown Jackson, as you may know, was the sole dissenting vote last week on the question of whether random federal judges should be able to unilaterally enjoin lawful exercises of presidential power and effectively assume the authority of the presidency unto themselves. What was her legal rationale for her dissent? Well, I can't say, because there was nothing resembling legal rationale anywhere in her written opinion. It was just emotions and feelings and emotions interspersed with a heaping helping of the same dumb leftist catchphrases you hear every day on MSNBC. And before I start reading any of these quotes, I want to first say, if you haven't read any of Justice Brown Jackson's written opinions since she joined the court, I strongly encourage you to do so, because I would never call someone a complete fucking idiot who hadn't fairly earned that title. And Justice Brown Jackson has fairly earned the title, and then some. The impression that one gets when reading her legal opinions, at least for me, is how is it that this Supreme Court justice has such a non-existent understanding of how the law works? How did she get a law degree? How did she survive the first week of law school? How did she get into law school in the first place, except by being a black woman? Now, when Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, Joe Biden told us that we were long overdue for having a black woman on the Supreme Court. And he was going to scour this country up one side and down the other, looking for the finest black female legal mind that he could find. And look, I know it's not fashionable to say things like this, but saying unfashionable things is why I'm here, so here it is. If this was the smartest black woman you could come up with, that is a damning indictment of black women. Because Ketanji Brown Jackson is a fucking idiot. Her opinions read like something a really bright 8th grader might come up with who had just begun civics class a couple weeks ago. I mean, are we allowed to be offended when the Supreme Court, which is supposed to be a venue for only the most exceptional legal thinkers among us, starts being populated by complete fucking idiots? Why, yes, I think we are, as a matter of fact. And let's stop pretending this has anything to do with race or sex. I am a very militant believer in meritocracy, as all Americans are supposed to be. I want the federal judiciary to be populated by the absolute best judges we have. If all the best judges were black women, then I would want all black women judges. If the best judges were all one-legged mulatto hermaphrodites, then I would want all one-legged mulatto hermaphrodite judges. Because that is how meritocracy works. Anyway, here's the quote from Justice Jackson, responding to her critics, who have correctly pointed out that she's a complete fucking idiot. Quote, I have a very thick skin. My parents gave to me a sense of my own ability to write and to speak out and to say what I have to say and to not be really offended by other people saying what they have to say. I actually don't get my feelings hurt. What I do is I try to respond as effectively as I can in my own writings. End quote. And she has so effectively damned herself with faint praise here, I feel like I don't really need to add anything. Dateline Los Angeles, Friday, 11 July. I don't know, Jim Eagle. Are we allowed to do 2 consecutive stories on black woman judges who are complete fucking idiots? Yeah, I think we should. After all, all we do here is dispassionately report the news. Judge Maame Iwusi Mensah Frimpong of the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California issued 2 restraining orders late on Friday enjoining federal officials from detaining any illegal aliens whatsoever on the grounds that they might have been racially profiled. Now, let's just take a moment to let the wave of stark raving idiocy wash over us before we proceed. Big cleansing breath, that's better. Now, in what is surely a completely novel innovation in the history of American jurisprudence, Judge Frimpong is making the argument that if a certain class of criminals happens to be ethnically homogeneous, then you can't prosecute them because that's racist. Again, just let that wave of idiocy wash over you. Don't try to fight it. Can you imagine if we had woke idiot judges back in the day who tried to apply this same standard, where that might have left us? If we had woke judges 90 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to lock up any of those mafia kingpins since they would have ruled that we were racially profiling Italian Americans. And 50 or 60 years ago, good luck trying to prosecute any of the terrorist acts perpetrated by the Black Panthers or the American Indian movement. And I feel like I have probably already put more thought into this than Judge Frimpong ever did. Judge Frimpong, who was born in Los Angeles to lawful immigrants from Ghana, who has enjoyed every opportunity the United States has to offer, who was educated at no cost in the nation's finest universities, bachelor's degree, Harvard 1997, Juris Doctor, Yale 2001, a person whose entire life story provides powerful, irrefutable evidence that the American dream is a very real thing, and it's available to everybody, irrespective of race, color, ethnic heritage, or national origin. You know, it's almost like the Ivy League's been turning out America-hating maniacs for way longer than just the past few years, and we all just didn't notice because we were too busy not paying attention. And look, you can just as well say, well, yeah, but even 100 years ago we had no shortage of college professors who were card-carrying communists and America haters, and you would be right. But that mattered a hell of a lot less in a world where only 15% of the population ever went to university. When we adopted this stupid everybody must go to college model around 30 years ago, we exploded the power and the influence of those America-hating communist professors beyond anything it ever was before. We gave them a lot more impressionable young minds on which to feast, and like with most other government-based social engineering initiatives, we never stopped to think what the unintended consequences might look like. And here we are, grappling with those consequences every day. And speaking of grappling, here's a man I would never try to have a wrestling match with. He is my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, a man so masculine he makes John Wayne look like a flamboyant homosexual, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.
Tactical nuke incoming!
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Blast Radius, where we generally complain about everything that happened in the past week because it seems like the Onion's writers have taken over reality. I don't understand why that's the case, but I'm really digging on it. The whole concept of the fall of Western civilization spawned this entire platform. I say we carry it forward into the future, utilizing nuclear power. How about that? All right, so today, I actually didn't tell Cap one of the videos that I had backstage, and he just touched right on the tip of it. You know. So we're going to just jump right on into this stock video that I picked up. So
as long as it's just the tip.
Just the tip, and just for a second, the classic line.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Nobody
I
ever
got-
lied who made that claim.
I was going to kind of spring this on you at the hour mark and just be like, poof, deal with this. But I come across a video where a particularly soy-infused individual explains how the Department of Education took over the entire concept of politics, right? The name of the video, to be completely fair, How the Department of Education Hijacked Our Schools, Poisoning of America. Now, this is part 3, but the point remains the same, right? The fact is that we took a perfectly functioning educational system that was actually fairly high yielding in its day and age up until the mid 60s or so, 50s, no 60s, mid 60s,
Yeah, mid to late 60s, I would say.
Right.
And
So,
before higher education was turned into a loan sharking scheme.
right. Well, I mean, the pay to win scheme is basically what it became. But anyway, the point is I'm starting at the bottom and you went ahead and touched the top of this topic. And this is where all of this ends, right? So Homie's going to go into, and it's a 15-minute video. I'm going to kind of jump around through it a little bit, but he goes into the whole concept of what the Department of Education was originally put together for versus what it actually did and currently does, right? The idea behind it was to grant better funding to the states specifically for education that they couldn't earmark for anything else. So the money that come from the federal government went to the state education, went to the education and nothing else, right? Because
yes, and it was never supposed to have any involvement with curriculum.
Right, curriculum was
that only lasted until Obama.
Right. Oh, well, actually, there was a bunch of stuff that went down before Obama.
Well, yeah, I see your point. It's not an unfair one.
I mean, there were steps. There were lots of little steps that went there. And just about every president and every administration between then and now took a small piece of Department of Education's mandate away from them after a fashion and left indoctrination centers that look exactly like prisons. How does that count? So the channel, I'm sorry, I was supposed to tell you the channel name is Dad Saves America. I
like the channel name.
I love it. Although he does look a little bit soy infused, he does have a beard. So there's some testosterone present.
Yeah.
I don't think he does.
Since he has a beard, I am willing to implicitly trust him until he loses my trust.
Right. Also, he's wearing a black shirt, and that means, he's obviously trustworthy.
Yep.
Back to Dad Saves America. If you have been with us for the past several weeks, we are knee-deep into the Poisoning of the American Mind series, our exploration of America's school system. And this episode is really important because it is where we dive deep into the history of the Department of Education, that halcyon institution which has managed to spend trillions of dollars for nothing.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's something I forgot to mention. I meant to mention it. The Department of Education has a budget that's higher than most countries' GDP.
Yes, and ever since it has existed, there has been an inversely proportional relationship between the higher the Department of Education's budget gets, the lower its scholastic achievement of American students drops.
They lower the standards. They do it intentionally so that they look like they're making progress and better numbers. In reality, they're just lowering the standards. They're trying to do the same thing in the military, and the military kind of went, we can't win with that.
And anybody who has ever tried to help their kid do Common Core math homework can tell you all about what a travesty the Department of Education is.
Jesus, dude. Like, I've never wanted to go Columbine so bad in my life until my daughter brought home some math that didn't make any sense.
I know exactly what you mean.
I
do math for a living, and I couldn't make heads or tails of this shit.
At first, after you do it a little bit, you realize it's just math with extra steps.
And it is always framed in terms of woke racial politics, which is fun.
Well, that's praxis. That's actually something I think we lost the battle on. I don't think we're going to be able to retrieve that end of the spectrum. There's nothing we can do about it. It's a lost cause.
No, because we all just slept too long and didn't pay attention until it was too late.
we didn't notice it. We sat around and we read our kids' homework, and in our kids' homework, it said all of these things that just were patently false as part of a math problem that has nothing to do with what was being written in the page, right? So I don't care how many transgender Johnnies walk into a female bathroom and start fighting each other. That doesn't matter. All I know is there are 2 apples left. That's all I know.
Yeah, just tell me the answer. If you get the answer right, you got the answer right. I don't care how you got the answer right. Get the answer right any way you want to get the answer right. Just get the answer right. But that's totally antithetical to the educational orthodoxy today, let's say.
You're right.
Right in.
Oh.
And see how.
And this is the reason. This whole thing that's fixing to unfold is the reason why Praxis got through it. And it took a major movement to take place for the rest of it to get kind of walked back at least a little bit. But they're just biding their time. All those teachers are still just sitting there quietly waiting patiently for Bad Orange Man to stop it. Stop being so mean.
Absolutely. They all think this is just a temporary anomaly and they're going to ride the thing out and then everything will go back to normal. And there's a lot of people on the Republican side who think that too. Make no mistake.
Absolutely.
The federal government has helped in the poisoning of the American mind.
We're off to a good start.
Here we are in modern 21st century America, a land and time dominated by amazing technology, where the Star Trek vision of talking to our computers like people has become a reality with ChatGPT.
Are you about to reveal something about AI?
Where we all carry around supercomputers like tricorders in our pockets, connected to a global information network, where the answer to almost any question we could ask is literally at our fingertips. It feels like people should be smarter than they've ever been, and training people to be smart should be much easier than ever before. So how is it possible that American schools can be so backwards and just old? How is it possible?
That's a good question. How can that be when we're spending more than the GDP of Brazil every year on a very small portion of our government, and that one tiny bit of our government trickles down stupidity to all of the states?
Somehow we managed to win 2 world wars and land a dozen men on the surface of the moon with no federal Department of Education.
But did we win if they're actually still in control?
That's a different video.
Okay, we'll do that video later.
Teaching overwhelming majority of schools is someone who is usually not a world-class public speaker delivering a lecture to a room full of bored kids.
In what way?
And often someone who didn't even specifically study the very subject they're asked to teach.
Bueller.
How is it possible that in district after district across this gigantic country, tens of thousands of schools dot the land, from rural towns to inner cities, and yet most of them operate pretty uniformly, overwhelmingly with mediocre to bad results by their own standardized and deeply flawed metrics? The USA is the richest nation on earth, spends trillions on school, and yet we can't break into the top 15 in the international PISA ranking? The federal government.
Exactly.
And here's another fun fact about American education. The states and cities that have the highest per capita education or per student education spending have the lowest achievement uniformly right across the board. So you tell me how that happens.
It is years and years and years of teachers and educators and the Department of Education grading their own work on a curve. They apply the best standards available in the student body as the highest standards achievable, and you have a downward sliding metric that always looks like progress.
And it's also teacher unions enriching themselves off the back of students to whom the money is supposed to be going to help their education. But
yes.
As always, is a big part of this problem. Nothing in the Constitution establishes a role for the feds in schools. It is not an enumerated power, and those powers not enumerated are explicitly left to the states and to the people themselves. But the influence of the feds has only grown and grown over time, and it's gotten much more powerful very recently in the scheme of things. Believe it or not,
Hold on.
the first federal Department of Education.
Wait. I think he just made a faux pas. Did he refer to as the federal government as the Fed?
Yeah, he might have.
I think that's what he
Or maybe
was.
maybe he said the feds, plural. I don't know.
Maybe, but I'm going to let it go. But
Actually ended up being closed down 150 years ago. Researcher Kevin Koser writes about this little-known story in his Politico article, Kill the Department of Ed? It's been done. The first
because we're going to trust Politico on this show.
Yep. Those paragons of journalistic virtue at Politico.
Dude, how can you get any more level than completely far left wing? I mean, it's fair, it's balanced, all left wing stuff.
They are just as trustworthy as ABC News, by God.
Exactly.
But it was mainly run by this guy, Henry Bernard. He was a nationally known education reformer, sort of a successor to Horace Mann. The point of the department, so the law said, was to compile data about education, collect facts about the organization and management of schools and school systems, and to promote the case of education throughout the country. Right from the get-go.
That's it. That's all. That is the extent of the mandate for or the charter for the Department of Education, is to basically tally all the test results at the end of the year and tell you how many students you got and how they did. That's it.
Yep.
There's nothing in there for them to change or alter or anything at all. The most I would grant under that purview is possibly a uniform testing structure, but it should not be attached to the individual schools and has no basis on what kind of funding they get. And the reason I say that is because different teaching methods end in different results. You may have a very successful school that produces excellent carpenters, but for whatever reason, the reading scores ain't all that great, but they'll bid you a clock. I don't know if I agree with that statement, but I made it. So there you go.
Controversial.
Everybody loves a good clock.
President Andrew Johnson didn't want the department created. Congressman Andrew Rogers said, "I am content, sir, to leave this matter of education where our fathers left it, where the history of our country left it, to the school systems of the different towns, cities, and states." This legislation proposes to collect such statistics which will give a controlling power over the school systems of the states.
And
even Andrew Johnson, who is arguably the absolute worst president in history, even he understood this.
Right. If you give the federal government, any government, control over any amount of the schooling of your children, the government will naturally turn that into an indoctrination center to support government.
Well, really, anytime you expand central government power, anytime you add another tentacle onto that octopus, you good luck trying to rein it in when it starts trying to increase its own power, because it always does, because that's what bureaucracies do. That's why we're supposed to be hesitant to add to bureaucracy and massively expand the central government, because the same thing always happens. There's never been an organ of the central government that said, I think we should get smaller and less powerful. It's never going to happen.
That and any government function, and any function that you put under government, the department responsible for it has no need to solve the problem, only to exacerbate it so they get more funding. That's it. Look at the drug war.
The problem is so bad I cannot fix it without more funding. So until then, I'm just going to have to kick the can down the road.
Right. Look at the drug war. The drug war cost trillions upon trillions of dollars, and all it did was discover more drugs. That's it.
Indeed.
It didn't stop anything. It didn't quit anything. It didn't win anything. All it was a sinkhole to pour money into, where you got to prove how criminal and corrupt everybody is. And it also
the people who got rich were the drug lords and the bureaucrats.
It also provided a venue through which corruption could be directly injected into our police force, because poof, you suddenly have civil asset forfeiture and all of the things associated with it.
And it didn't do anything to ameliorate the rampant corruption in Central and South American governments either. It probably made it worse.
It served zero purpose in the end. It did nothing but collect a list of names of people who were once drug dealers and might still be. That's it. That's all it accomplished.
Yep.
Critics back then assumed, correctly by the way, that even a little federal overreach could become a slippery slope. Thankfully, after about a year, the new Department of Education got folded into the Department of the Interior, and by 1870, Bernard left Washington. Over the next 100 years, the Department of Education remained closed. The political class did stick its nose into education, however. For instance, the General Education Board was a private group launched in 1902 with the goal of the promotion of education within the United States of America without distinction of race, sex, or creed.
Boy, them boys would be rolling in their damn graves. They see the state of the education system in our country today. I tell you, we're going to need to get a donation in here in order to set this straight. Oh, my Lord. Can you imagine what that Board of Education then would say?
Well, and let's remember also that, up until the early part of the 20th century, the entire first century plus of our history, there is no such thing as a public school anywhere. If a community decided that they wanted to have a school, then they would start a school and they would educate their children. Usually sometimes it happened through the auspices of a church or a religious organization or some local philanthropic group, but education was handled in the manner that the local people wanted it handled, and that's the way that our founders envisaged it, I think.
Here in the South, to this day, if you decide to have a class on anything on earth you want to have a class on within reason, and you go to your local church, there's a decent chance that if they don't have someone in the congregation who knows enough about it to take a swing at it, they have other churches in their congregational group that do have someone, and they're willing to volunteer to teach children. That's the thing about
and that's
the way that works.
And that's a big part of the social usefulness of congregations and religious groups. It's not just about religion. It's also a powerful vehicle for social cohesion. And as those have become less and less prominent, so too has our social cohesion degraded along with it. And that's probably something that we should take stock of, because I don't think we really do.
So I want you to think back to the 1950s and the types of high schools and middle schools we had back then. Now, some people would immediately scream something about racism or try to make some distinguishing fact between those here and there, and how not everybody was being tested or whatever, right? But when it came down to it, local schooling was more effective for local people than all of the federal oversight you could throw at the problem.
Yes, and it's always been the case, and it always will be, because the people who are in the place where you live, they know what people there need to be taught in order to live useful lives in that place. And that's not something that you can ever administer at the central government level and have it be a good thing. There is no one size fits all in education. There never will be, and that's why our founding fathers believed correctly that all such matters should be left on the local level, and not even the state level, really, just the local level. The town where you live should make all the rules regarding the way that your kids get educated, and
Sure.
that should be inviolable.
I want to give an example here, and I want you to take a good hard look at the educational system of Hawaii and the educational system of Puerto Rico. And Hawaii is a full-blown state, gets full-blown benefits, has everything you could possibly ask for in the way of support and funding, whereas Puerto Rico kind of catches the back end on all of that and gets, like, I don't know, they're not as well taken care of as maybe they should be, right?
Right.
You look at the actual educational standards between the two, Puerto Rico is pulling down generally higher GPAs and higher graduation rates. And the reason is that because they're not a full state, they're not necessarily beholden to all the funding requirements that the federal, because they can't be funded through states funding, right? So if the government says, hey, we're going to give you X amount of money to all the states, Puerto Rico didn't get that money. Generally in that bill, there will be a caveat for provinces and territories, right? They'll get some money from some other source, but they're largely handling their own education, and they're not doing a terrible job of it. They're just not doing a great job at it either. But that's fine. I mean, local schooling may not be excellent, but it will generally not be complete trash. People want their children to succeed, and it incentivizes them to do what's necessary to make that possible.
And also, we shouldn't go without mentioning that the more authority gets subsumed to the central government, the more they are enabled to cook the books and invent, pretty much fake numbers out of whole cloth. I'm reminded specifically of early second term, the Obama administration. His Department of Education sent out a directive that basically said, all of these violent crimes that typically happen in high schools, we're just not going to call those violent crimes anymore. We're just going to categorize them as nothing, basically. We're not going to make any record. We're not going to make a big deal out of it. And then a year or two later, the administration comes out and says, school violence, lowest levels ever. Look at us. How awesome are we? And it's really as simple as that con job. Obvious, manifestly transparent con job. And they were still able to do it because that much authority has been vested in the central government.
Exactly.
This group. It was started with $1 million donation by John D. Rockefeller, who ultimately gave well over 100.
We're fixing to lose here.
That's
I am.
Over
it's good to see you, bud. I appreciate it.
Today's dollars. It was a private organization, but in 1903, the board was officially sanctioned by an act of Congress, so it carried weight. Consider carefully the ideas put forward in their original mission statement. In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive folk.
Unhampered by tradition. Let's just get rid of the last several thousand years of human knowledge and wisdom, and let's just build something new from the ground up, because we are so all-fired smart.
All right. This is one of the things a lot of people are, at least on YouTube, when I'm doing the whole Panelverse thing, I encounter people talking about we need to tear it down and build a new one. And I'm like, necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity is what created the Constitution of the United States. It was the fact that a whole bunch of different ways had been tried, and all these different ways had one or two things in them that actually seemed to work, and they collated all those things together and then looked at a bunch of really, really smart white men and was like, okay, does this sound good? And they all went, sure, I don't know, I'm drunk, and voted on it. But they didn't vote on it, they just agreed on it. So I guess that's a vote. I mean, like,
yeah, we've been doing it this way for 10 or 12 years. We know it's pretty much a disaster. We know all the reasons why it doesn't work. So let's go write a constitution where we get rid of all the things that don't work. And, that's the way these things are supposed to. You don't tear things down just for the sake of tearing them down. You tear them down because they have been shown not to work and you have a better idea.
The thing about the Constitution is its intent was never to codify power for the federal government, but to limit that power only to the things that are necessary for
the Bill of Rights is a set of prohibitions against the central government, telling it what it may not do.
Exactly. And people misunderstand these documents to be the, ensconcing power of the federal government. And I'm like, no, ma'am, no, sir, that's not it. That is the ensconced power of we the people, and not in the communist sense, but in the, hey, get off my back sense.
Yeah, and there is not one single word in the entire Bill of Rights that affirmatively grants rights to the citizenry. It is a list of things that the government may not do. Shall not this, shall not infringe, shall not that. That's the entire thing is phrased in those terms and in that syntax, and that's not an accident.
No, it's not. And in every case, it is a prohibition against violating an individual, whether it's the states as an individual, cities as an individual, individual groups, freaking corporations. It works across the board. Now, I'm not a big fan of corporate entities being considered individuals, but you got to have an analogy that works somewhere, I guess. Anyway, let's try to.
Well, there's no getting around the fact that the word corporation itself means that you're taking a company and making it into a person for legal purposes. I mean, I don't disagree with your line of thinking. It's just kind of an unavoidable thing as far as the word corporation goes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know.
Well, and I think, and you know what else? Just briefly, remember when in 2012 when Mitt Romney got in a whole shitload of trouble for saying corporations are people too? That's the only point he was trying to make, is that for legal purposes, a corporation is basically a person. That's all he was trying to say, but that got, completely distorted beyond all recognition by the fake news media, as it always does.
And what people don't realize when he said that is he was making the point of the corporation being liable in the same way as a person. That exactly. Is where all this comes from. It's not so much profiteering and whatnot. That's not what designed the laws around this. It's liability that designed the laws around this.
Yeah, we don't allow business entities to become corporations just so they can gain advantages. It's also so the society can gain certain advantages against the predations of business entities. It's two-way street.
Yeah. And so you have to have something responsible in order to have litigious capabilities in it. For it to occupy a space in the system, it has to be able to conform to the system. And an individual is one of the only ways a corporation could do that.
Yep.
Persons.
Huh. Well, that's not creepy at all. Unhampered by tradition, unburdened by what has been. This is the ethos of the totalitarian utopian visionary. No thank you, pass. The feds got involved more directly, too, with things like the 1946 School Lunch Act. The Supreme Court did famously strike down state-sanctioned racial segregation in the landmark 1954 Brown versus Board of Education case, and they got much deeper into the mix in the 60s during the battle over civil rights. But striking down corrupt and discriminatory state laws that infringed on individual rights is a very different enterprise than actively dictating the education system and its standards for the whole nation. Being an opponent of state tyranny did not give the federal government justification to become a new kind of tyrannical ruler of our school system. Instead, it would take a whole different kind of perceived threat to invite the federal devil to our schoolhouse door. Enter the rise of globalization.
Accurate. The very second foreign money got involved in federal government, it became an issue. That's the linchpin failure of our system, I believe.
And I don't want to let this segment go by without giving a big shout out to Linda McMahon, Secretary of Education, who is absolutely hitting it out of the park.
I haven't really looked into what she's doing.
The assignment that Trump gave her, he said, put yourself out of business. And she said, yes, sir.
Wow. Wow. That's okay. Good job.
Yep.
We have some shawarma later.
About what was happening in America and around the globe after World War II. First of all, there were relatively intact families across the board in America, which is where most of the actual learning was taking place. The American family provided a backstop for our already too Prussian education system in the immediate post-war era. Consider that only 34% of adults in 1950 had graduated from high school. And that number only rose to 52% by 1970. Think about that. Our often celebrated egalitarian post-war era, when people say the middle class was strong, was dominated by Americans who lacked a high school diploma and therefore spent much less time in those Prussian prisons. And then we experienced the meteoric rise of global competition.
Hold up. He just kind of made a statement that jumped through about 50 years of educational theory and doctrine, right? Those Prussian prisons.
Yep.
I can't.
So it's a deep cut reference, but I like it.
Yes, it's good. No, it's really good. Anybody interested needs to go look at the direct cloning of the I don't remember what it was called. It was the Prussian educational in I can't remember what it was called. Anyway,
I'll look it up.
The Prussians did it. Blame the Prussians. Damn Prussians.
Europe, a smoldering, charred wreck from World War II, was rebuilt. Japan was on the rise like crazy. And we had this global competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. In the face of all this, the notion of being globally competitive, that we were a nation at risk, came into the public consciousness. In the 1970s, all of this set the stage for President Jimmy Carter to resurrect the long-defunct Department of Education.
Yes.
Conservatives initially-
Yes, the AI zombie makes my heart happy. I want to see it again.
I've got it, dude. It's the Humboldtian model of higher education.
That's it.
It emerged in the early 19th century. The core idea is a holistic combination of research and study, sometimes called simply the Humboldtian model. It integrates the arts and sciences with research to achieve both comprehensive general learning and cultural knowledge. Several elements of the Humboldtian model heavily influenced the concept of the research university. The Humboldtian model goes back to Wilhelm von Humboldt, who in the time of the Prussian reforms relied on a growing educated middle class to promote his conception of general education.
Nice. Thank you. And here's the zombie education model.
Resurrect the long-defunct Department of Education. Conservatives
It makes my heart
initially
happy.
hated this. An abolished department became a part of the GOP platform. But the idea of a federal role in education slowly baked into the American cake.
Welcome
Helping
the
this along
neocons.
was a report in 1983, commissioned by the government, called A Nation at Risk.
Yep, there it is.
Painted a picture of an America falling behind our global competitors because of the lack of rigor in our school system. The report began with this ominous call to action. Our nation is at risk. Our once unchallenged preeminence in commerce, industry, science, and technological innovation is being overtaken by competitors throughout the world. This report is concerned with only one of the many causes and dimensions of this problem, but it is the one that undergirds American prosperity, security, and civility. We report to the American people that while we can take justifiable pride in what our schools and colleges have historically accomplished and contributed to the United States and the well-being of its people, educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and a people. What
You'll notice it opens just like a climate change treatise by trying to inspire as much fear as it possibly can in the first couple of paragraphs.
Absolutely.
Of a coming apocalypse. We're driving toward the cliff. We've got to stop it. We need immediate action right now. We need to do radical this and radical that, and it's the same psychological operation.
They're describing the development of idiocracy long before idiocracy was a thing, and the methodology by which to accomplish it, and then putting it into fucking action. Wow.
was unimaginable a generation ago has begun to occur. Others are matching and surpassing our educational attainments. What happened next, right at that moment, was like a dream. Bureaucrats realized the error of their ways and collectively resigned. The Department of Education disbanded. Power was returned to the states, and better yet, the people who were left alone.
And we give it back to you, the people.
Dynamic, diverse, and competitive.
And we give it back to
I still can't understand what Bane is saying.
Why in the world am I wearing this mask? I'm sorry. I hate that movie.
Education ecosystem emerged spontaneously across the land, stoking a new generation of curious innovators and future Thomas Jeffersons and Benjamin Franklins, who would unleash a new age of American leadership. Actually, no, it was in reality the complete opposite. We actually doubled down on the things that are terrible about school: the rigidity, the bureaucracy, the backwards methods that are contrary to the way humans generally learn. The beastly authoritarian Prussian system sunk its claws in to wreak even more havoc. And of course, in no time at all, Democrats and Republicans together made federally guided education all but untouchable. In fairness to President Trump, he clearly wants to do something about it. Earlier this year, he signed an executive order instructing Linda McMahon, his education secretary, to take steps towards dismantling her own department. That'd be great. Hopefully the president, with the help of the Congress, will actually follow through and take real steps towards shutting the whole department down. Because
As I sit here, the feds have never been more involved in how our kids' schools work. And all
I kind of feel like he needs to lean into that S a little bit more when he says that. The feds.
And I think we've had a great object lesson just in recent months in just how pitiful the state of education is, even at what are supposed to be our most prestigious universities, because we've all seen the videos of the kids from the campus Kefia brigades at Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Brown and Penn and all of them. They've just gotten done chanting all of these pro-terrorism slogans. They think they're obviously on the right side of history, but you go up to them and you say, that the from the river to the sea chant you were just doing, do you know what river and sea you're talking about? And they never do. Not only are they unfit to be students at prestigious universities, but they don't even have what we used to consider a 6th grade level of world geography. Well, it's like, I don't know, it's like the river and the sea that are in that, area.
You're talking about an educational system that created people on the street that believe Africa is one of the nations?
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. So downward slide, slippery slope.
This federal intervention has had an entirely predictable result. The feds don't technically run much, but they don't have to. They do write mountains of regulations and education standards, and they also hand out piles of money. And guess what? If the states want that money, they have to do what the bureaucrats in Washington say.
Quid pro quo.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Who cares, John? If kids are learning, what's the difference who makes up the rules or who hands out the money to pay for the schools? Well, here's one of the many problems with that logic. Kids aren't learning. Since the
They used to have that guy for a teacher.
Department of Education in 1979, the federal government has doled out billions of dollars to allegedly make kids smarter. Overall spending in K-12 public schools, in fact, has only gone up and up and up for decades. You want to take a guess at the impact all that money has had? If you guessed absolutely none, you'd be correct.
Actually, I disagree. It has had an impact. It has created
a downward effect.
A bureaucracy whose point is to create more need for more education dollars by creating more need for education, not by educating your children, but by literally de-incentivizing the learning process as much as possible.
They have a perverse incentive to make kids stupider, because when kids are getting stupider, you can say, I need more money, and then they'll stop getting stupider. That's the way this all works.
Also, those stupid kids are being educated by seriously the most left-wing part of our population, the collectivist of collectivists, right? Half the teachers out there are already slightly left, regardless of what you say or do, just because of the nature of what they choose to do with their lives.
Well, in at least half the states in the union, if you walk into the average elementary school classroom, it's going to be festooned like a float in a gay pride parade.
Half the time, you're not wrong. And it's really weird to me that inevitably we give I can't say that right. That's not going to sound right. The most collectivist people in the United States are operating the highest educational institutions, and largely all of the educational institution. And that's by proxy of hiring power. They only hire people that match the narrative. And so praxis and hiring and personal opinion takes care of the rest of the indoctrination.
And there does not exist any intellectual counterpoint in any echelon of the system now, because it's been completely captured by the people who wanted to capture it. And the people who didn't want them to capture it didn't try hard enough for it not to get captured, or they just weren't paying attention.
Well, largely what they did was set up alternative type schools with different funding things, and for the most part, no funding of any type will ever defeat the federal government. They'll just buy you out. And that's what
and if you try to start a voucher system, they will politically smash you. They will dump as much money as it needs to politically smash that initiative.
Yep.
This chart is a perfect example. The top line is education spending. since 1970, adjusted for inflation. The bottom lines are test scores. Notice how one goes straight up and to the right, and the others stay the same. Not good at all. Whatever you think about standardized testing, it is the metric that these people tell our schools to focus on improving. So they're failing on their own terms. The failure is even more profound, of course, but we've already.
In the individual yearly appraisals, they utilize the reduction in standards to appear to be an improvement of education. That's the ultimate secret. They say every year that they are succeeding, they're doing great, but we've got so many slipping through the cracks. We could just get a few more. It would be awesome. Give us more money. They give them more money. They lower the standards a little more, and you get more students involved because more pass. There are people going to college today can't read. How'd they get in college?
Exactly. And you know what makes the problem exponentially worse is the amount of public ignorance that we're up against. Because I know everybody who's here right now has had this experience of someone of interacting with someone who actually thinks that if the federal Department of Education goes away, that there will be no public schools in the country anymore. People actually think that.
This is one of those weird things where I encountered like really early in my YouTube career. I came across an individual on YouTube. His channel today is named The Shade Master. And he told me straight up during an interview, because he said he didn't like the Department of Education. I said, well, what would you do with it? What would you use it for? He said, I'd abolish it immediately, fire absolutely everybody involved with it, and turn that money over to the states directly. And I was like, but, and I realized it took me a good few days after that interview to realize I have no good butts. All of my butts are shit that other people said that I overheard. And for some reason had just ensconced in my brain somewhere as being useful information. And it was only being directly broached on that subject that brought it to the forefront of me going, well, you're fucking right, dude. Like, I got nothing.
Yeah, and also even beyond that, there's a lot of people on the left think we absolutely have to have a federal Department of Education, but when you ask them, could you please show me any real-world data point that shows any benefit that American school children have gained since 1979 when the Education Department came into existence? And they can't because there is none. There just isn't anything like that.
It's not a thing. There's
not a thing.
It's identical to the drug war. Identical. The more money you pour into it, the more death and carnage and destruction takes place involving the people that are fighting the drug war. And almost nobody gets convicted, but anyone who does gets convicted and let out. And
the harder you try to ameliorate the problem, the worse the problem gets.
And the more money they need. So we're back at the beginning. If you just manage that shit instead of trying to control it, it's a whole nother ballgame. It changes the entire scheme.
Instead of trying to remake the entire world in the image of your pie in the sky, little collectivist fantasies.
What was he called it? Utilitarian, utopian, something? Yeah.
Yeah, and he was right.
And he was right. That thing that he said, I can't remember it, but it was a good one.
We talked about that. A Stanford University economist looked at hundreds of studies about the correlation between funding and academic performance, and he found there is not a strong or consistent relationship between student performance and school resources.
And there it is, the same thing we just said.
Things like this.
You want to be competitive with not just other states, but other nations, you have to fund education.
They're frankly full of it. Look at the numbers. The spending per pupil per year, adjusted for inflation, has exploded 280% since 1960. I know this firsthand, having lived in Essex County, New Jersey. New Jersey is where calls for more school funding should go to die. Thanks to a series of state court decisions known as the rulings, New Jersey schools in its poorest cities like Newark actually spend dramatically more per student than in wealthy areas like Montclair or Glenridge. Decades later, the outcomes for most needy students are still awful. Say it with me now. Money is not the problem. So how could it possibly be that this massive education nightmare goes on and on when we know what we are doing is not working? Davis Guggenheim's film Waiting for Superman did a great job exploring the issue overall. But I'd also like to recommend checking out my friend Bob Bowden's 2009 film, The Cartel, to learn more about the forces keeping New Jersey's schools in particular, and our nation's schools as a whole, from evolving. If you do, you'll get a front row seat to the reasons things don't change. And it's because some people don't want them to.
Oh, God. Randy Weingarten.
Exactly the way they are very powerful.
If there is a more loathsome, more execrable human being on the national political stage, I don't know who it is. That woman is pure evil. I mean, why were your kids locked out of school for a year? It was largely because of her. She did it.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. But it was not just her. It was her and a bunch of other people who think like her.
Yeah, I think you have to break up the teacher unions. I don't think you can fix any of the problems without breaking up the teacher unions.
I had certainly come to the thought process. I hadn't thought about this, to be honest. I hadn't actually thought it through, but I had thought that defunding and eliminating the Department of Education would do that by default, but I guess not. I hadn't really considered that's on a state level and local level, isn't it?
Because the people who run those unions, they think education is not about teaching children. Education is about the benefits that teachers get and the money that the unions get and the money that the union leaders get. Kids actually learning things is so far down their list of priorities, it doesn't even feature anywhere on it.
Everyone, archived link.
I mistimed that badly. I muted myself and hit play and tried to get over and straighten it anyway. It was bad production.
You're still the best in the business, my friend.
Best in the business, folks, and don't you forget it. Send money. Send money now. I'll get better.
Send money immediately.
You're familiar with Styx Hexenhammer? What is his thing? It's the gay pirate with the aviators. That guy. Styx Hexenhammer 666. Yeah, that guy. All right. So it turns out there's been a couple of cases of pneumonic plague in Arizona. And here to tell us about it is our favorite gay pirate in Minecraft.
In the description, a case of pneumonic plague actually has emerged in Arizona. This is the first time since 2007 that we actually got a pneumonic plague case. Plague comes in 3 variants. It kind of depends on which organ systems it happens to be gestating in. You've got bubonic plague, which is relegated to the lymph nodes, generally speaking. It's the most common kind.
All right, so that's an interesting point. The Black Plague was called the Black Plague because of the prevalence of bubonic plague in the population during this time period. But the thing that killed most of the people that killed them was pneumonic plague. And these people didn't have the same symptoms as bubonic plague, right? It's the same virus, same bacteria, same thing, does the same thing. It's just that if it attacks the lymph nodes, you get buboes and it's bubonic. If it attacks the lungs and the airways, and then there's a septic version he's going to explain in a second.
I just know doctors used to look really cool when they wore plague masks.
Yeah. Actually, we're going to get into that in just a second. I thought you might. You got to keep in mind, the plague doctors were utilizing an early concept of a gas mask in combination with an early concept of cleansing and separation of bodies, right?
Yeah, so we kind of scoff at them now and think they look kind of, but they were on the right track. They were absolutely on the right track.
Absolutely. And they were on the cutting edge of the technology of that type of thing. These people were dealing with dead bodies on the regular. Take a Nostradamus was a plague doctor. So yes, he would have been showing up in some of that plague doctor swag with the long coat and the big freaking mask face and the huge goggles over his eyes, the whole nine, man. And that was
you've got the mask with the big long bird beak on it, and you shove a bunch of fragrant herbs and spices in there because you think that's going to block you from the bad plague air. And It's
And
not
here's the
quite
thing.
how it works, but they were on
That's
the right
not-
track.
But a lot of the herbs and stuff that they put in there were caustics of various types. And yes, it did kill the plague. It did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Garlic and your honey, all that kind of stuff. Yes, it functioned as a not really a good gas mask, but there was some level of functionality to it, which is saying a lot.
And they certainly were better off wearing the plague mask than they would have been walking in barefaced.
That's true.
Problem. The death rate is not even in the double-digit range as long as you have sought treatment. Pneumonic plague is a little bit more serious. It's spread in the respiratory sense. It's much more contagious. This is probably what led to the Black Death, by the way. Again, you've got a case of it in Arizona. How lovely. And then you have septicemic plague. Now, septicemic plague, once it gets into your bloodstream, there's about a 90% chance that you die. This does not necessitate that it's particularly contractable.
As an observation on that point, septicemic plague is what happens after your pneumonic plague reaches a certain level or your bubonic plague reaches a certain level. Either way, it migrates to the blood, becomes an overbody infestation. Whammo blammo, you're toast.
Right, because it's got the word sepsis in there, so...
Yeah. Typically what it means is some part of your anatomy has burst and bled and directly into your bloodstream, and so you have direct infection being...
Right.
And so there's no coming back from that at that point.
No.
Not
much. But it's much, much more deadly. There's a reason why plague doctors wore long coats and plague mask and stuff like that and would prod people with sticks and so forth. Sticks, pun intended, by the way. They did this to avoid contact with the contagion. And ultimately, it was a primitive form of a hazmat suit and a gas mask, more than anything. I've already spoken of this at length in one of my occult videos. Technically speaking, they were on the cutting edge of technology, actually, at the time, plague doctors were. Nostradamus was a plague doctor, and very wisely advised people to blast out the...
So I got laughed out of a bar one night having a conversation about Nostradamus, and they were discussing the quatrains, and we came to and I brought up the fact, I was like, Nostradamus was a plague doctor, right? And they were like, yeah, but he didn't run around and all that and get up. I was actually, he helped establish
Of course he did.
that he was one of the people at the time that was respected and educated and actually had survivors coming out of his. So you listen to the people successfully doing the thing you want to do, and so plague doctors spread far and wide. The whole concept.
He was one of the men who contributed to the development of that technology, which of course contributed to the development of all the technology since then. I mean, just because it was primitive from our perspective doesn't mean that it was not useful and important, because it very much was.
He was utilizing a revolutionary, groundbreaking technique that would go forward to save millions and millions of people. And it was a very simple thing of washing his hands with lye soap between patients.
Yes, and the absolute last thing we should do is scoff and smirk at those men.
And I brought that up in a bar conversation one night, and they said that this sort of predated the whole Google thing, and so we couldn't just ask Jeeves back then, right? These guys said they had known me for a few weeks, but didn't know me well enough to realize that I don't bring stuff like that up because I don't know it. I'm not just talking trash when I do that, And so, like, after being just ribbed about it all night, each one of those guys over the next few weeks had to eventually come to me and be like, "Hey, I didn't know that." I know, man. It's okay. You didn't know.
The more you know.
Now you know. So, plague doctor, cutting edge, absolute genius, went on to predict everything, if you believe that kind of stuff.
Swampy locations that were filled with human excrement and shit like that with running water in order to defeat contagion. This probably saved millions of lives, by the way. You can think what you want about his quatrains, but at the same time, as far as being a plague doctor goes, yeah, he was, again, on the cutting edge of technology. So we have a case of pneumonic plague in Arizona now. The good news is that we can treat plague these days with antibiotics. The other good news being it's relatively rare. You have 6 or 7 cases in the average year. in the United States. They're mostly relegated to the Southwest, and generally they don't tend to be a problem. There was a plague outbreak, for example, I think about 10 or 11 years ago in China, in Western China. And they immediately drew up the tanks and said, nobody's coming, nobody's going, we're going to deal with this our way. They did the right thing, by the way, very authoritarian, and some thousands of people, if I remember correctly, did die of plague, but they managed to stanch it out. And plague is still a big problem, though. Yersinia pestis is capable, number one, of potentially mutating. Perhaps it jumps from person to person more easily.
Actually, I'm going to end this particular part of the video right here because I want to address that. Gain of function research. If
Should I get out my Tony Fauci prayer candle now?
If you wish, if there was any particular germ that I would point gain of function research at for military applications, of course, you don't have to do any of that with smallpox, but this pneumonic plague, if you can trip it just enough that it's no longer our slight inbred, we don't have an immunity, we have a resistance to it.
Right.
And Europeans have a higher resistance, or Europeans and Asians have a higher resistance than Africans. So that's a byproduct of Africa, for whatever reason, not being a good incubator for the plague, whereas Asian and European cities apparently were. And a large percentage, quarter of the population, bro, like, it's you can't imagine it today, right? It's absurd how many people, bodies stacked up in the streets like cordwood, people whose job it is to walk around and poke people with sticks to make sure they're dead before they get loaded on the cart. I mean,
bring out your dead.
That's a Monty Python sketch, but it is accurate, and that is why it is funny.
Yeah, and that's what life actually used to be like back in the plague days. But as far as on the subject of bioweapons, the one bioweapon scenario that really concerns me, and I know we've talked about this before, and I think we still haven't done very much to fix the problem, is China releasing a bacterial pathogen and then cutting off our antibiotic supply. We still get 90% of our antibiotics from China, and we've got our ass hanging out so far on the bacterial pathogen bioweapon front. That scares me. It really does scare me.
Right. It's terrifying. But, I'm less concerned with foreign powers or even native powers tinkering with the genetic codes there than I am Mother Nature, because she is a much more impressive chef when it comes to natural things. Right?
She is a fickle mistress.
A fickle mistress. And if you poke her hard enough, she will respond. And I believe, I can't remember, I think it was Guns, Germs, and Steel. There was a book series written by a guy who was proposing that the population explosion of humans and the fact that humans are going into areas where humans have never been before to find places to live and whatnot, and better habitat and whatnot, would introduce humans to new novel viruses and diseases that would then serve to balance the freaking slate. But up to this point so far, also another part of that is the drug resistance of already extant germs being more prevalent in the future. He predicted a massive die-off of the human population about every 25 years until the extinction of the human race. And I don't think he's accurate because he doesn't take into account the advancement of medicine and whatnot. But at the same time, the theory is strong. The hypothesis seems to hold at least a significant amount of water. You want to see something nuts?
Yes.
Awesome. I have no idea why anyone would do this. But, so there apparently has been a proposition that they remake the Model T with modern tech.
I am here for it.
Are you?
Oh, it depends.
Welcome back to Autobike Insight.
Now,
Your
I'm pretty sure this is all
the
AI.
most
There's some of that
exciting
slop we
updates in
hate,
automotive
but I just thought that
and
here, I'm gonna
motorcycle.
I just thought that the concept of a modern Model T would be an interesting thing to take a peep at. Right? I mean, look at that thing. It's definitely
it's like the next step of retro car evolution after the PT Cruiser.
Yeah, you're not wrong. But imagine if you built that frame, stuck you a V6 in the hood with a turbocharger on it, you'd be pulling like 60 miles, 80 miles to the gallon and still have some enough swagger when you got there, you know? It could be highly efficient. It weighs nothing.
Believe it or not, I actually worked on a Model T once. I had a mechanic friend who, you know, he happened to know somebody who owned an old Model T and wanted to get it running again and brought it into the shop. And yeah, spent a few days crawling around under that thing, and just how fascinating it is to see the bare bones of where everything since has come from. It is so instructive to see everything just boiled down to its essence like that. And you know, the entire history of all internal combustion vehicles comes from that vehicle, and there you are looking at the original, and you can easily discern where all of the other refinements and advances came from, and it was a really fascinating experience.
I had a buddy of mine, or actually a buddy of mine's dad. He bought an old Tin Lizzie truck, right? He caught it at auction, paid like $90 for it or something, like some absurdly cheap price. And when he brought it in, we started, you know, looking at it, kind of picking it apart to see what's in there. And none of it was right. Nothing from the body down, everything was something else. And we had to go research to find out what it was. And it was an old Model T. Someone had taken like a mid-20s Tin Lizzie and dropped it right on top of the Model T. And you got to go do a thing. Yeah. You got to do a thing. Do the thing. Do the thing.
What thing am I doing?
I'm going to wait. You'll look at the screen eventually and notice what's up there.
Queenbird, thank you very much for the super sticker. I sure do appreciate it. You are a channel legend and my second favorite lady in the whole wide world.
Excellent. You did a good job. I'm proud of you. But seriously, when you boil it, like you said, boil it down to the brass tacks of what it takes to make a body. Imagine this, right? This very simplistic concept utilizing the modern construction methods with 3D printing, impact plastics, structural panels. This thing, once you got done, this thing wouldn't weigh 800 pounds, man.
Yeah, I was going to say 700.
Right. And so, I mean, I'm going to throw a couple of crumple zones and some safety features in there, give it an extra 100 pounds, right?
Which seems reasonable.
Right.
There is a reason why they called it a Tin Lizzie after all.
You wrap that thing up in some freaking like cool decor, you throw a wrap on it, you do the run flat forever run tires and put in some super soft like motorcycle suspension type stuff, and you're still in under 900 pounds, and you can drop a 4-cylinder of that thing out of your basic freaking Toyota and drive it to the moon and back on 75 cents worth of gas.
You know what movie line I'm reminded of right now?
Hit me.
Marty, we're in a DeLorean. He's in a 46 Ford. He'd rip through us like we were tinfoil.
Yes, sir. But that would be true in the new models, of course. If you're using all structural, it's tough. Don't get me wrong, but it's not steel. It's just not. I mean, the hardest part of this thing would be the engine block. Which
and also, I mean, how much did it benefit us winning the Second World War just from our assembly line capacity in our automotive factories that could be easily repurposed to create military materiel? And if you think that didn't give us an advantage over the enemy, you're not right, because it really did.
I made a reference
That's an
earlier.
advantage we had over every other country, was that we could, I mean, the Germans were only slightly behind. I mean, I don't want to sell the Germans short, but man, we you know how quickly we shifted from car production to tank and artillery and howitzer and war production? Like practically overnight we did that. No other country could have done it the way we did.
There's a reason they named Shermans Sherman. And it's because whenever they built the tank, they were discussing what they wanted the tank to do. And it was basically and terrorize motherfuckers. Take ground and terrorize the enemy. And if you go look at Shermans, on a one-to-one basis, the Shermans aren't terribly effective against any particular contingent of enemy tanks. They're not overpowered. They break down all the time. The
Sherman. The Sherman is vastly inferior to the Tiger and the Panzer both, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'd go almost. The Panzer has a little bit on the Sherman on an individual state, but if there's a Tiger anywhere on the battlefield, it's going to take 6 Shermans. Well, it's going to take 6 Shermans to take it, maybe. And the thing is if it took 6 Shermans, we'd field 12.
Yeah, and
if it's going to take 12, we'd field 20.
And in the early days of the war, the first generation of Shermans, before I think they had put some more protection around the gas tank, they called that thing a Ronson lighter.
Right, they called it the barbecue coffin. Yes, sir.
If you took a direct hit, the thing and everybody in it was going up.
Yeah, and it happened so fast that there were no survivors, almost never. The only people who ever survived had like burns from the waist down, and they were already sticking out of the turret when it went down, because that thing.
Yeah, maybe the tank commander who was nearest to the hatch might have a chance, but not the driver and the gunner. They were screwed.
Right, but the point of the Sherman largely was, and I hate to say this, God, it's gonna sound so bad. It wasn't survivability. It was the ability to lead down range, and it was utilized. It was America's hammer. We had a hammer and made every problem a nail. You've got a machine gun.
You win modern wars by overwhelming the enemy with industrial capacity more than anything else.
Absolutely. And right now it's kind of turned towards the drone concept. I'm not even sure what type of war doctrine will deal with this.
Oh yeah, I have no idea what the next world war is even going to look like.
I think I do. And there was this game made, I can't remember the name of it, but in the game you were playing as this guy who had control of different types of drones, right? And you were supposed to be doing like a sneak assassin espionage kind of thing, but the freaking drones in this game were so much cooler than the actual game itself. I just did every mission as one of the drones. Yeah. It was so fun, and I'm terrified by that. I have nightmares about that, thinking about how the turn that warfare has taken recently, and me playing that game, and then the NPCs in the game not knowing someone's coming after them, and how easy it was.
As a reconnaissance platform and a weapons platform, it completely revolutionizes the battlefield. And we've the only real world example we have so far of what it does in a real world scenario is the last 3 years of the Russia-Ukraine war, which, for whatever that's worth.
I want to have a thought experiment with you right quick before we go. Okay. I want you to look at the Chinese parades and the drone shows that you've been seeing around the world, and imagine if they took those drones, put a grenade on each one, and instead of flying them up in the shape of some bird or whatever, some national event, they put them to fly out to every single major leader's house.
I'm reminded of the Japanese bat bomb project. You remember that one?
I love those things, dude. That was the most brilliant idea. Okay, maybe we should bring that one up on the next show. I could spend 30 minutes talking about that, dude.
Yeah, we totally should. That's
Find whose name is on that one, because that man needs.
Yeah, they were just half a century too early with that one, but they had all the doctrine right. They had the right idea. They thought they were going to burn down the whole Pacific Northwest with those bat bombs, baby.
Oh, baby, good Lord, they had plague bombs too.
Yes, this is true.
They made rat parcels loaded with fleas, and then added extra fleas in little bags so that the bags would float out. It's really.
Oh yeah, they had all kinds of. Yeah, we
Great.
definitely should do a segment on that next week. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining us here on the Blast Radius. Our favorite part of the weekend is the 90 minutes that we spend with you. So let's do it again next Sunday, shall we? Until then, we wish you a delightful and edifying next week, a pleasant tomorrow, and a great day after, and a splendid day after that. We're going to see you next Sunday, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Until then, have a great day. What am I saying? Do not comply. Get off my lawn. I blew my own tagline.
You want to try it again? Cut.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?